Hello and welcome to another episode of Insert Clickbait, because I couldn't think of a good name. And today we're going to be painting a Genestealer Malstrain and taking inspiration from Ridley Scott's Aliens film. I'll catch you in the video. It's been a while since I've done one of these painting videos, so hopefully I can rechannel that Bob Ross energy and give us a quite relaxed, nice paint job and share that with everyone. So I wanted to capture basically the aliens theme that this set surely has the vibes of. Looking at the art for the set, the negative space within there, or the actual usage of shadow rather than actual what is drawn, really reminded me of one of the posters. I think it was for Alien Covenant, so I'll put that on screen now. And the comparison between the two, I thought it was actually really more sinister and enhanced the look of that artwork, and that's something that I wanted to translate onto the model. So what I've been attempting to do is to create blackness, and not using like a special paint, because I know there's like an ultra black paint that's available, and when I say ultra black I mean like the blackest of blacks. Not using that, but simply just using a normal paint, using some I'm going to say easy methods, simplistic stuff, to create the feeling of this incredibly sinister world for when we delve in our gangs into it in the next few weeks. So we're going to start off with the model primed black. I went for matte black from Colourforge because it is just a matte black and I didn't want any shine to the darkness on the model. Now you could obviously use varnishes to matte it down at the end, but I just chose Colourforge because I like the grippiness as well. But any primer will do. And we're actually just going to start with a dry brush to the top edges of the model. Now this is going to be establishing the light source, as well as I wanted to give a slight fungal growth look to the top of the model to get that sort of creepy horribleness that we see from these malformed Genestealers. Now I've chosen Bright Ivory from Pro Acryl. I didn't want to go with perfect white because I wanted a bit more naturalistic looking and tones included on the model. I didn't want any sort of unnatural pure whites on there. The difference between this and a normal dry brush, I would say, is not in the actual implementation of a dry brush, but I was thinking about the placement of the colour. So I picked a top right point where you would normally say do a zenithal highlight from. If you look at the model with it facing you, the top right shoulder would be where I placed the primary light source, and then I essentially dry brushed everything that would hit going downwards. So I've given a very sort of light dry brush to start with, like lighter than you would normally do, I would say, just so it's picking out those edges, and then I can build on it more. Now, one of the things of wanting these very white fungal growths at the top was that I essentially painted the white fungal growths until the brush had the amount of paint I wanted on there. So I'd wipe off a little bit onto my tissue, but not loads. Then I'd paint a load onto the fungal growths until the dry brush was basically getting no paint off it. And then I'd do bits on the armour, and it allowed me to, on the model, test out how much of the dry brushing was going to affect the model. Now, on the actual armour, obviously the top right was going to be heavier, so then I carried on painted down the chitting of the body on the back. The left shoulder sort of was gradiented down, and then I started picking out all along the arms, the upper edges. Now they have some ridged plates where it goes into the under carapace, the ribbing, for lack of a better word. I highlighted with the dry brush just the top edges, and essentially just gave a slight bit of colour to anywhere on the model that I thought it would add interest. Even if it didn't make sense for the light source, just a tiny bit of colour to be added to the model in various locations. So that might be the top of the foot, just like one of the sinews along the foot, or the tendons along the claws if I wanted to highlight the claws. The ridge of the head, I tried to paint basically one side of the head and leave the other side of the head to be free from paint. And as you can see, it's not an incredibly difficult method. The thing to take into account is just that you want stark contrast between the areas of light and the areas of dark. So actually there was a lot more dark left on the model than I thought was reasonable, and that would give a sharp contrast between those two areas and create that sinister alien poster look to them, where the light's hitting one side from a solo light source, illuminating the model, and then dropping off sharply in the gradient of the light. Now, the best thing about painting the model like this was that it was very forgiving if I made a mistake. If I did make a mistake, I'd grab my black paint. I was using Coal Black by Pro Acryl, and I'd just back to black the model and essentially create that negative space again, and there was nothing wrong that you could really do that was irreparable at pretty much any stage across this paint job, because even if I couldn't be bothered going back to it because I just got lazy across painting the Genestealers, and it was a very fast method, I shouldn't have got lazy, but if I did get lazy, it's like, I'll just back to black it, and then that just will be one of the areas of negative space. So long as I've got essentially the head painted right, or the upper carapace, the entire model in general is going to look like I want it to with the effect. So next we get onto the actual colouring of the carapace. For this, I wanted to take inspiration from the picture of the spider with fungal growths that is possibly one of the most disturbing things that exists in nature, I would say. So if anyone has watched wildlife programs like David Attenborough's things in the jungles of the Amazon, where they've got ants or spiders that gets fungal spores dropped on them, and then it controls their movements, and they move up in the trees, the fungus explodes out of them, and then they drop spores back down onto the ants and spiders below. It is absolutely terrifying that it controls their behaviour like that. And that's something that I want to take inspiration for the Malstrain project. So what I've done is I've taken burnt orange and dark umber from Pro Acryl, and I've essentially just made a mix. Now, I'm going to completely guess at these numbers, but I'd say it was like 2/3 burnt orange and 1/3 dark umber. And the reason I'm guessing at that is I didn't want to actually stick to a specific scheme, because they're naturalistic models. There's going to be variation in the carapace, and so long as it's all in the approximate range, the colour would be right for me. So actually each Genestealer in the gang is different. I halfway through Genestealers would add a bit more of one colour or the other to the mix, just whatever happened to feel right at the time. And it's not something that you can really get wrong, because there will be these natural variations in the models, as is in the natural world. I mean, they're not uniforms that are all made out of the same dye that will look exactly the same. There is different levels of light that will hit them, especially in this like dark, sharp light environment that we're creating on the model. There's nothing you can really do that can get this wrong, so long as you've got a general idea of how you want them to look. So yeah, I mixed up my batch of burnt orange, dark umber. I then thinned it by about 50%, and then tested it on my nail, because apparently that's what painters do, and I've seen people do that, so I do that as well sometimes. And I wanted a translucent blend that would allow me to essentially wick off some of the paint as I felt I needed it and go over the dry brushed areas so that we could still see some of the white through. Now, as it's a wash, or if you go too translucent, that's not a problem. You just wait for it to dry and go over again, potentially even diluting it further. If you'd like, oh, I'm almost there, just dilute it a bit further than you have, and then you've done 2 layers of wash that are more translucent. Maybe you can get it done in one wash, but you can't take colour off. You can still add colour to anything. So I did that, worked through the model of all the white areas, and then essentially onto the dark areas which I'd not fully caught with the dry brush. I started adding highlights to some of the upper edges, like the flared bits of chitting around the arms, the edges of that central carapace, the sinews on the hands, stuff that I was trying to target with the dry brush but might have missed, or stuff that I'd specifically not picked. Now, go hog wild with those highlights, because in the last step, because we're using black as the base colour, almost like the underpainting colour at this point. Yes, getting Miles's terms in here. Because we're using black, it's so forgiving. You've not got to match it to another colour. You just grab your black and re-go over the area and re-establish that very sharp dark tone, that very sharp black. You can just immediately re-establish where that shadow is. So it's so forgiving to have painted them like this. And it's one of the reasons why essentially it's a really fast method, is because you can sort of just get on with it and really easily just go through the model. If you mess up a bit of an area, you can black it out, say like on the chitting, black it out, re-dry brush it. It was very, very easy. Again, stick to a more translucent layer. When I was mixing it up, I was like, oh, this is too translucent, it's going to fall apart. And almost like I'd put the wash on and it'd leave a bit of the almost too white on the chitting, and by the time it had dried, it had actually, like, sort of the colour had coalesced onto the dry brushed areas and stained them to like quite a nice pleasing looking orange colour. So that is essentially it for this step. It's something that you could do both of these things with an airbrush, I suppose, but I don't think you'd get the sharp tones that we're looking for using an airbrush, and actually using the dry brush to pick out those upper edges and then glaze with a brush. It's very easy to create these very sharp distances in such a small area, and that's normally a benefit of an airbrush, that you get a nice gradient across a flat plate. But that's actually the opposite of what we're looking for here. We're looking for that sharp difference between light and dark to create that alien poster type feel. So after that have dried, we've got the final step for the chitting, and that's to re-establish the deep shadow between each plate of chitting. And we're essentially going to do this with a misdone pin wash, by which I mean we're going to put black into the corners and essentially let it spill out over more of the chitting than we normally would for a pin wash. We actually want it to stain back into the shadow. So although we've been going for very sharp transitions, we're going to let it wash over and fade out into the plate to darken some of that plate back. You might notice that actually the rest of the model, I've done a random little extra step, and that's because in the top corner now you'll see how this step on the original video turned out. So I've had to go back and refilm it with a model that was already done, because the entire gang at this point is already done. So yeah, I'm gonna basically just apply black to the gaps in the chitin in various places, like where the hand meets the arm was a common one, where the shin meets the thigh, like that piece of chitin. Any deep recess that just needs redefining to give the model more variation and difference between the plates of armor, essentially. Now, you're about to see me entirely mess up. Let's say mess up. And that's because I end up putting, I'm like, oh, I'll just redefine that shoulder just a little bit around there. And basically just put a load of black all over the shoulder and completely mess it up. But essentially, not to worry, what we're going to do is try and get off some of that black by diluting it further. It still stains, because we've used quite a matte paint in the Pro Acryl range, it still stains the layers below. So what we can then end up doing is just darkening down the rest of the arm that is going to be beneath that light source. So the shoulder should be the lightest bit, being the closest point to the light. So I just darken down the other chitins below that shoulder so that it doesn't look visually like randomly bright on the forearm when the shoulder's dark. I then wet it down a little bit and swipe a cotton bud or Q-tip over the shoulder just to potentially get it a bit brighter. But really, I'm with these natural variations that we said in the orange chitin step, I'm not really that bothered. I'm not going to lose any sleep over the chitin there being naturally slightly darker. And finally, we come to the last step, 2 steps, and that is to paint the eye and any tendrils, like the Cthulhu tendrils that come out of the mouth. We're going to start the bright ivory back onto the eyes. At this point, I'm also going to paint any teeth that I want showing on the model. And then as soon as I've done that and it's dried, I was going to use, or I did use, the Mantis Warriors green to paint, to establish like an alien eye to it. And the way that I've selected that is by using the trusty colour wheel. So spinning my colour wheel to the red-orange section, that gives me a triadic split with yellow, green and blue violet. So basically that just selected the colour that I wanted for that to give it a nice triadic colour. And that would then also tie into, with the tetrad, my underpainting step. So in a lot of the artworks for Necromunda Secundus, they have this blue tinge, like the underwater, almost abyssal tinge to the artworks. So I just wanted to establish that onto the models. So what I did is I took Games Workshop's Calidor Sky, not Cantor Blue, Calidor Sky, and with a very thin spray, but like controllable, so it wasn't obviously spidering or anything like that. I used a normal 30 psi, but only slightly put the trigger down, and I started spraying a very light glazing of the blue onto the undersides of the model, the direct opposite from the light source that we'd established with the dry brush at the start of painting these models. Now, it's not very noticeable on the final model as an actual colour itself. I did try some with a very strong blue shade to the bottom of them, and it wasn't for me personally. But when I went back to black, I found the effect was actually worse than if I didn't have it. So I just decided to do this very light blue tinge to the shadows. It just established sort of like a bit of a highlight and interest to those black areas without disrupting the effect of the black too much. And that completed the model and gave us our Alien Covenant style Genestealer Malstrains. Hopefully you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please do all the YouTubey stuff. It lets me know that you actually want to see these painting videos that I don't do frequently, but to be honest, I enjoyed doing this time. It gave me a bit of a kick up the arse to be doing a painting video again, to be doing these Genestealer Malstrains. So if you do like it, let me know by doing the YouTubey stuff. And as always, there is a Patreon link below where you can get access to the Discord, dice, early release videos, as well as podcast formats of the Tuesday Talkies. And with that, I'll catch everyone next time. See you in a bit.